This is the list of the top 10 most infamous Outlaws MC members. My goal on this channel is to share true 1%er history and perhaps show a side of the 1% motorcycle club world that many have never seen before. As with all the videos on this channel, if you disagree with any history shared on this channel and have viable evidence to the contrary, I invite you to share it in the comment section. Also, if you like the channel, make sure to like and subscribe to receive all my latest content. Number 10 on our list is Donald Deak 1%er Tanner. Deak 1%er, who earned his name preaching as a deacon in the army, was a ranking member of the Detroit Outlaws, where both he and his old lady both wore the Detroit Outlaws patch. He and his old lady appear in several of the photos of the well-known Flash 1%er photo collection in the mid-1960s, where they can both be seen wearing their Detroit Outlaws patches along with many other outlaws from various chapters of the Detroit and Chicago areas. Shortly thereafter, Deak was dispatched to Florida with the mission of creating a stronghold for the Outlaws in the state of Florida before any other major motorcycle clubs could do so. It was around that time that he met James Big Jim 1%er Nolan, who was the founding president of the Iron Cross Motorcycle Club in Florida. Together, Deak and Big Jim convinced a number of other local clubs, including the Cossacks and the Outcasts, to patch over and become part of the Outlaws to form the South Florida chapter of the Outlaw Nation. It is important to note that the Cossacks and Outcasts mentioned have no known affiliation to the widely recognized Cossacks and Outcasts of today. Deak and Big Jim worked together and made great strides in establishing the Outlaws in Florida, and eventually Deak headed up a chapter in Jacksonville. As a member of the Jacksonville chapter, Deak eventually ended up doing time in the Florida DOC for alleged grand larceny and narcotics charges. He was also present during the so-called crucifixion trial of Christine Dees, where members of the Florida Outlaws had allegedly nailed Christine Dees to a tree in retaliation for not turning a $10 trick. Then in January of 1975, Deak's old lady Sandra Lee Tanner was found shot to death on the side of a rural road in the Jacksonville area. It was his wishes to spread his late wife's ashes over Jacksonville, though it is not clear whether this ever took place. Little is known about Deak's later years. He passed away in January of 2007. Deak 1%er will always be remembered as the charismatic leader that brought the Outlaws from their Midwestern stronghold into the state of Florida, where their legacy lives on to this day. Rest in peace, Deak 1%er. Gone but not forgotten. Number 9 on our list is James Big Jim 1%er Nolan. When Deak Tanner arrived in the state of Florida in the year 1967, one of the first people he met up with was Big Jim Nolan, who at the time was the president of a club called Iron Cross MC. They hit it off right away and became close friends. It wasn't long before Deak convinced Jim to become an outlaw, and Big Jim 1%er Outlaws MC was born. Deak and Big Jim ruthlessly tore through the state, absorbing smaller clubs and growing the Outlaws' presence in Florida. The feud between the Outlaws and the infamous Hells Angels began when two members of the New York Aliens, Sandy Alexander and Pete "Greased Lightning" Rogers, went their separate ways. Sandy joined the New York City Angels and Greased Lightning Rogers joined the Chicago Outlaws. At first there were no problems. It was when Rogers allegedly made inappropriate advances toward an Angel's old lady at a party and Sandy beat Rogers within an inch of his life that the feud began. It was shortly thereafter that a couple of Massachusetts Angels were rumored to be heading to Florida to supervise the covering up of an ex-Angel's tattoos that Big Jim 1%er is alleged to have set the trap that resulted in 2 dead Angels at the bottom of a rock quarry. It is alleged that Big Jim and other outlaws lured the Angels to their clubhouse, where they then forced the Angels into a van at gunpoint before tying them up and shooting them execution style. It was alleged that Big Jim 1%er was the undisputed leader of the Outlaws in South Florida and had ordered the killings of the Angels, though he was later acquitted of all charges. After a string of incidents in Florida, Nolan eventually moved to Tucson, Arizona, where he hoped to establish a new chapter of the Outlaws. In 1981, Big Jim 1%er allegedly shot and killed John McQuillan in the parking lot of a biker bar in Tucson and was arrested by a deputy that claimed to witness the shooting. Big Jim was ultimately acquitted, as the killing was deemed self-defense because McQuillan had brandished a .38 revolver before being shot. Big Jim 1%er was ultimately convicted in 1989 of conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. While serving his time, he became a born-again Christian and was released from prison in 2016 after serving 27 years. He is still a proud member of the Outlaws to this day and also a proud and devout Christian. Much respect to you, Big Jim. 1%er. Number 8 on our list is the famous country singer and longtime member of the Outlaws. David Allan Coe is known worldwide for his countless hit records. He is a retired member of the Louisville, Kentucky Outlaws. Known as the father of outlaw country music, David Allan's most well-known songs among outlaw motorcycle clubs include Panheads Forever, A Harley Someday, The Ride, and Fuzzy Was an Outlaw. He also composed such classics as Take This Job and Shove It, Tennessee Whiskey, If That Ain't Country, and You Never Even Called Me By My Name. At one point during his music career, he was set to perform with Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings at what was rumored to be an extremely dangerous venue. David Allan Coe said, "Don't worry about it, we'll provide our own security." He then rode onto the stage wearing his Outlaws colors with a pistol sticking out of his pocket and began performing alongside Willie and Waylon. A local newspaper reported on the event with the title, "The Outlaws Came to Town." David Allan Coe continues to play his music live to this very day and is regarded by many as a true 1%er through and through. Much respect to you, David Allan Coe. 7 on our list is the elusive and infamous Fuzzy 1%er. Little is known about his true identity, but Fuzzy 1%er is most definitely one of the most well-known American outlaws of all time. The popular song by David Allan Coe about Fuzzy 1%er, titled Fuzzy Was an Outlaw, tells of a legendary longtime outlaw that rode his motorcycle barefoot. A barefoot bearded swamp rat, but a man above all other. He never was the kind to turn his back upon his brother, sang Coe in his ballad about Fuzzy Wuzzy, as his brothers called him. Ride on, Fuzzy 1%er, your legend lives on. Number 6 on our list is notorious outlaw boss William Kincaid Flamin, better known as Chains 1%er. Before becoming an outlaw, William Flamin fought bravely for the United States in the Vietnam War. He was a sniper and tunnel rat during the conflict and was highly respected as a soldier. Chains is believed to have joined the Outlaws in Florida upon returning from the conflict in Vietnam before being dispatched to Atlanta, Georgia, and ultimately to Charlotte, North Carolina, where his legend truly took hold. In the 1970s, the conflict between the Outlaws and the Hells Angels heated up all over the country. Sandy Alexander and Pete "Greased Lightning" Rogers grew up together as friends. Both joined the New York Aliens Motorcycle Club and eventually parted ways when Sandy became a Hells Angel and Lightning became an outlaw. Everything was fine until Lightning made inappropriate advances toward the old lady of an Angel's wife at a party, and Sandy, who was also a martial arts expert, beat him within an inch of his life. That is where the conflict allegedly started. What followed was one of the bloodiest conflicts in all motorcycle club history. 2 angels were allegedly killed and thrown into a rock quarry in Florida, along with many other incidents that followed. Things heated up in North Carolina, where the 2 clubs fought tooth and nail over which would call the state home. It became one of the bloodiest so-called battleground states of the conflict. Then in 1979 at 5:30 a.m. on the 4th of July, Chains Flamin rode into the property of the Outlaws Clubhouse in Charlotte, North Carolina to find 3 of his club brothers, 1 probationary member, and the young girlfriend of an outlaw, all shot to death in what was later dubbed the 4th of July Massacre. It was long suspected that the Angels had committed the massacre, but the investigation eventually led to a pair of non-club affiliated criminals that were suspected to have been in an altercation with an outlaw before going to the clubhouse to seek revenge. The massacre and what occurred that day will always be shrouded in mystery. Chains went on to cement his legacy as one of the most righteous outlaws to ever do it, proudly wearing his patch as an outlaw until the day of his death in September of 2017. The Leos went after him in 1982, but they couldn't keep a 1%er down. He left this earth riding his motorcycle with Charlie on his back as an outlaw. Rest in peace, Chains 1%er, gone but not forgotten. Number 5 on our list is the notorious heavy-hitting outlaw Big Freddie Massey, better known to his brothers as Freddie 1%er. As with the legendary Fuzzy 1%er, Freddie's reputation precedes him by way of legend and stories told. It is said that a picture tells 1,000 words. That is certainly true if Freddie is in the picture. The reputed one-time boxing champion of the Ohio prison system, Freddie 1%er certainly leaves an impression on anyone he encounters. A loyal brother in the infamous North Carolina crew throughout the years of heated conflict with the Carolina Angels, Freddie has paid his dues and then some in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. During raids on clubhouses and properties owned by members of the club in 2010, Freddie was quoted by a reporter saying they see the outlaw patch and they automatically think you're a drug dealer, a thug, no good. Freddie 1%er later suffered a vehicle accident that by all accounts should have killed him according to sources. But Freddie is so tough that even death thinks twice before messing with him. Freddie will surely be forever revered among his outlaw brothers as the legend he is. Ride on Freddie 1%er. That brings us to number 4 on our list. Clarence Smitty 1%er Smith, the one-time chapter boss and one of the highest-ranking officers in the Outlaws, has become a shining example of the lengths to which the powers that be will go when it comes to outlaw motorcycle clubs. Smitty 1%er was charged and ultimately acquitted of multiple homicides between the years of 1983 and 1999. The first was an alleged quadruple homicide provoked by a sexual assault against Smitty 1%er's old lady Bridget. The slain victims had allegedly cornered Bridget in a parking lot and sexually assaulted her, ripping open and ejaculating on her dress, allegedly saying to Bridget, "Tell Smitty that's for him." I don't know too many men that wouldn't retaliate to something like that. Which is exactly what the court alleged that Smitty did when a day later the alleged rapist and his cohorts were found shot to death in their apartment. All eyes were immediately on Smitty when the group were found murdered and he was ultimately arrested. Nevertheless, Smitty was able to retrieve a not guilty verdict from the jury by taking the stand and speaking in his own defense. His acquittal was said to have angered law enforcement, who he claims swore that they would get him one way or another. And law enforcement did promptly go after Smitty once again by alleging that he took part in the construction and placement of a device that exploded and took the life of federal witness Robert Collins, who was set to testify against members of an organized crime group in Louisiana. This time Smitty lost the original trial and was sentenced to death by electric chair. He was then sent to death row in the famous Angola prison of Louisiana. The case was based on the testimony of 2 witnesses for the prosecution who were both former members of the Outlaws themselves. 8 years and a retrial later, Smitty was acquitted once again by proving that the 2 rats had made everything up to save their own skins. Then, after beating multiple murder raps himself, Smitty 1%er began using his skill in the courtroom to assist his outlaw brothers in their own court cases. Smitty is a brother of honor and a 1%er, so doing the right thing to help those he calls brother is all he knows. However, his newly found love of assisting his club brothers in the courtroom, coupled with the fact that he had beaten the multiple murder beefs that the courts had thrown at him, did not sit well with the feds. There's an age-old feeling among all outlaws, bandits and nonconformists regarding beating law enforcement agencies in the courtroom, and that feeling is that the deck is always stacked against you from the start. So if you happen to be cunning or lucky enough to get out of a heavy court case with your life and freedom still intact, then the best thing you can do is get the hell out of Dodge while you can, because the powers that be are known to be very sore losers. Unfortunately, Smitty 1%er did not heed this age-old warning, and in the end he paid dearly. The feds came back at Smitty with RICO charges, including charging him federally for the murders he had already been acquitted of. They got their convictions this time, and as far as I know, Smitty 1%er is still serving his time. Free Smitty 1%er. Now on to number 3 on our list. Leslie Bass, also known as Hillbilly 1%er. Hillbilly 1%er, the alleged one-time Outlaws MC international boss out of Jacksonville, Florida, was a smart and cunning member of the Outlaws. He was able to remain under the radar and was rarely, if ever, charged with any serious crime that I know of while in the club. However, the one thing that he is most well known for, aside from being the national boss for a number of years, was his affiliation with the group the Confederate Hammer Skins, an alleged white supremacist organization in the southern United States. An imposing figure at well over 6 feet tall, Hillbilly 1%er was not to be crossed. It is said that during his tenure he had goals of taking the club in a completely legitimate direction while generating income from all legal sources such as support gear. As little as we know about the reclusive boss man, we know enough for him to have made our top 10 as a living legend. It is said that he has now retired and is operating a lucrative business in Florida. Ride on Hillbilly 1%er. Much love and respect. Number 2 on our list is the infamous Milwaukee Jack Rosca. Milwaukee Jack 1%er. Milwaukee Jack was the international boss of the Outlaws during the infamous Black Diamond operation conducted by Charles Falco and his ATF handlers in the states of Virginia and North Carolina. Operation Black Diamond resulted in police raids on multiple locations, the death of an outlaw named Tomcat 1%er at the hands of ATF agents, and a long prison term for Milwaukee Jack 1%er who was convicted of conspiracy to commit RICO. Milwaukee Jack was preceded by legendary Outlaws International President Harry Taco 1%er Bowman, which left him with some very big shoes to fill. Which he most definitely did. He carved out his own legend during his tenure as international boss by aggressively expanding the Outlaws and fiercely defending their interests against any and all threats with machine-like efficiency. A ferocity that was extremely effective against other clandestine groups of men but would unfortunately prove to be his Achilles heel when dealing with the powers that be in the court system. Charles Falco, an undercover informant for the ATF, had already infiltrated 2 other upper echelon 1% clubs. Yet somehow he was still able to fly in under the radar and infiltrate his third and final club, the Outlaws. Many believe it was the aggressive expansion that gave Falco his opportunity to infiltrate the Outlaws. However, it happened one thing. That is for sure is that it resulted in the long-term incarceration of this legendary outlaw. Milwaukee Jack is said to have been one of Taco 1%er's closest and most trusted confidants during Taco's time as boss. So when Taco was arrested himself, it was likely a relatively seamless transition for Jack to step into the position. Law enforcement has always had such a hard-on for the Outlaws that international boss is likely never going to be an easy role for any member to take on. But Milwaukee Jack 1%er served with honor and brotherhood, having never once attempted to earn a reduced sentence by pointing the finger at anyone else. That's a stand-up man and a righteous 1%er if there ever was one. Stay strong, Milwaukee Jack 1%er, and may you ride again. Now on to our number 1 outlaw of all time. Harry Joseph Bowman, also known as Taco 1%er, was born in July of 1949 in the town of Marysville, Michigan. It was apparent from a very young age that he was a leader of men. Everyone that met him was drawn to him like a magnet. A Detroit motorcycle gang unit detective described Taco as a very interesting and bright guy, and also stating, "I can't say I admired what he did for a living, but I admired his leadership abilities." Taco 1%er was the protege of 3-time international boss of the Outlaws, the legendary Harold Henderson, also known as Stairway Harry 1%er. Under the mentoring of Stairway Harry, Taco 1%er became the formidable outlaw and legendary leader that he was always meant to be. A lot of people like to paint a picture of Taco as a heartless predator that would stab a loved one in the back in the furtherance of his own greedy agenda. But if you ask anyone that actually knew him and called him brother, you'll hear a very different story. You'll hear that he would do anything in the world for anyone he called brother. You'll hear that he was a man of true honor and integrity. A man that inspired love and loyalty in everyone he met. After Stairway Harry's final term as international president, Taco 1%er stepped out of his role as national vice president and stepped into the role that his mentor Stairway Harry had been preparing him for all along. The role of international boss of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. Under Taco's leadership, the club began to live up to the name Outlaws. Taco inspired a level of love and loyalty from his brothers so great that everyone in the club during his tenure was willing to go to war with anyone and everyone that showed any disrespect toward their club, their patch, or their leader Taco 1%er. During his tenure, Taco moved the Outlaws headquarters from Chicago to the heavily fortified Detroit clubhouse from which he conducted outlaw business. He was also known to travel with multiple brothers as security, often in an armor-plated Cadillac. Law enforcement called Taco the first businessman biker boss. It is said that it was Taco 1%er that originally created and distributed the Snitches Are a Dying Breed design on t-shirts and other products, along with a number of other designs. It is also alleged that he took the Outlaws away from traditional biker rackets and brought them into the big leagues. At one point he moved to Grosse Pointe, Michigan and enrolled his kids in private schools. In 1989, Taco 1%er allegedly brokered a partnership with the Detroit Mafia, which turned sour a couple years later when a hit was allegedly ordered on him. The alleged hit, however, never took place, as the would-be assassins spoke to their higher-ups in the Mafia who did not agree with carrying out a hit on Taco. Those higher-ups then set up a meeting with Taco where all differences were settled and the Outlaws were allegedly given a larger percentage of the Detroit rackets. During Taco's tenure as international president, the Outlaws were at war with a large number of other clubs, most notably the Hells Angels and the Florida Warlocks. There were many casualties on all sides. In the early 90s, George Christie, a high-ranking officer in the Hells Angels, arranged 2 sit-downs with Taco 1%er in an attempt to iron out the two clubs' differences, and they had actually formed a truce at one point. However, the truce quickly dissolved, likely over simple misunderstandings. It was the war with the Warlocks, however, that would ultimately land Taco 1%er in prison. Early during Taco's term as president, he dispatched Wayne "Joe Black" Hicks to Florida to build the Outlaws Nation in the state. Hicks did successfully build the state into the third-largest outlaw presence in the country after Detroit and Chicago. However, he ended up in a major conflict with a club called the Warlocks that originated in Florida in the 1960s, and it was during this conflict that law enforcement was able to get an informant into the Florida Outlaws who took down Wayne "Joe Black" Hicks and his top lieutenant Stephen LeMunion, who both then turned into testifying witnesses against international boss Taco 1%er. Even the best of us can be brought down by rats, it seems. Taco passed away in prison in North Carolina in the year 2019 and was buried in Dayton, Ohio at his request, because it is where many outlaws are buried. Ironically, he died just 2 days apart from his former rival, the national boss of the Warlocks and their founder Thomas Grubb Freeland. Taco will live on forever in the hearts of every outlaw and many 1%ers. He was an incredible leader and brother to his fellow outlaws. Ride on, Taco, and lead the forever chapter into eternity. Rest in peace, Taco 1%er, gone but not forgotten. Thank you for checking out the video. Stay tuned for the next video here on 1%er history.